Sue's back. And this week's story is actually unsolved. Ooh. The two of them left the house around 4, like I said, and that was actually the last time that anyone ever saw Naomi. Unless you count Billy saying that an hour after they left the house. What's up? I'm back. I took last week off. I posted about it on Instagram, but it just, the time change and seasonal depression and all the things just hit me like a brick wall. But I'm prioritizing my serotonin now and things are getting better. So we're back with another episode of Stab and Stitch. So this week's story is unsolved. Shout out to those who voted for unsolved in the Instagram polls because it was almost 50-50 split, which, I mean, I love a good solved story, but I'm here for the people. I'll give you what you want. Anyway, I have to be honest, I did not make the sweater I'm wearing today. I bought it before I started knitting, don't judge me. But I did make this shawl. So this is the Flower Friends shawl. It is by Wilma Westenberg. And it is this like gorgeously textured crochet shawl. I made it in a Lion Brand mandala. I think I used 2 of them to get like the color repeat. I think, yeah, like 1 and a little bit. But I absolutely love these pink colors. I wish I had more reasons to wear this shawl. I'm gonna be honest. Like I need to make reasons to wear this shawl because it's so cozy, and it matches this lipstick that I pulled out of the vault today. So today I will be once again working on my No Crying in Baseball Tee test knit. It's not actually taking this long to knit. I know it was in a video a couple weeks ago. It's just straight stockinette. So I've been choosing it for my Stab and Stitch episodes because it's easier for me to do while I talk than like color work or like nups, which, I mean, I love a good nup, but I cannot talk and do a nup at the same time. It's doesn't work. So we'll be working on this week. So before you pick up your project, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and then hit the like button and leave a comment to tell me what you're working on this week. And we will get into the story featuring Chester because he can't not be in. He loves the attention. Anyway, so this week we will be talking about the story of Naomi Wilson, who was born Naomi Pollard. She was born on August 20th, 1948 in Birmingham, Alabama, and she has 2 brothers, John and Lorenzo Pollard. They were all raised there in Birmingham, and Naomi lived there until she graduated high school when she moved to Chicago. So she moves to Chicago right after graduating high school, and there she meets and marries Benny Wilson. Now, Naomi and Benny lived in Chicago together for several years before moving to Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Cedar Rapids, Iowa is kind of like Benny's hometown. There's a lot of his family there. So they moved there, and in 1978, the 2 of them get divorced. Benny would remarry and ended up moving to Colorado with his new wife. But Naomi stayed in Cedar Rapids. She actually, very shortly after the divorce, began dating a man named Colbert Beets. Now there's a few things you should know about Colbert. First of all, Colbert goes by Billy. So you'll hear me refer to him as Billy Beets a lot as we go through the story. And the second thing to know about Billy Beets is that he is Benny Wilson's uncle. That tea. Now, unfortunately, 1978 was before the internet and social media, so we don't really know how Benny felt about this whole, like, his uncle moving in on his ex-wife thing. We can't go find the angsty Facebook posts or, like, see what song lyrics he posted about it. So we just have to assume that he was cool with it because he did get remarried and moved away and appeared to be happy. But Naomi, who is the topic of our story, she stayed in Cedar Rapids and dated Billy. She also was like working on getting it together. She was working for the Harnischfeger Corporation. it was a factory in Cedar Rapids. So she was working for them and was very much on top of her stuff. She actually had bought her house she actually bought her house in January of 1982, and she had purchased her car, like finished paying it off, the summer before that in 1981. So she's really getting on top of it. You know, she's 32, she's getting it together. It was also said from people who knew her that she went to church regularly, she was involved in the community, you know, she was doing all the things that they say you're supposed to be doing, right? So, on April 12th, 1981, it was a Sunday, Billy heads over to his girlfriend Naomi's house after church. He would later say it was kind of weird that she didn't go to church with him, but that was the only thing that was off about her behavior that day, according to Billy. So he heads over there and he didn't say what time he got there, but he did say that they both left the house around 4 p.m. Billy was on his way to his mother's house to drop off some ice that he presumably got from Naomi's house. And Naomi was headed to the gas station. She was going to go get some gas and then go visit a friend from work that evening, before she had to work, or like before coming home, because she did have to work a shift on Monday night. So the two of them left the house around 4, like I said, and that was actually the last time that anyone ever saw Naomi. Unless you count Billy saying that an hour after they left the house, he passed Naomi's car on the road. So Billy heads to his mother's house to drop off the ice and stays there for a while. Now, I'm not totally clear on at what point this went from like, Naomi's at a friend's to, something is seriously wrong. Like, she's missing. But according to Billy, he actually like started searching for Naomi that night. Something seemed off. She didn't come home or whatever it was. He didn't say directly, but he said that he did search for her until about 3 o'clock in the morning, that Sunday night into Monday morning. But he didn't call the police just yet. He waited to call the police until on Monday, when her shift started, the factory called him to ask why Naomi didn't come to work. So at that point, that was the straw. So he called the police and reported Naomi missing. It was Monday, April 13th, that she was reported missing. Now, I think the reason that the red flag of Naomi not showing up at work was like the thing, because of how responsible and reliable everyone in her life said that she was. She even, like, to the point that the assistant police chief, or the assistant chief of police, said to the media, from what we found out about her, it's not like her to not show up for work. She had good work habits, like very much like this was somebody who was gonna be there every day, or she was gonna tell you why she wasn't there. It seems like she was very rigid in that way in her life. I don't know that. I'm making assumptions from what folks said about her there, but she didn't show up for work, and so the police start to look for her, right? And not just the police. Actually, the Beets family got very involved in the search. And that is where we have to back up and tell you a little bit of context about Cedar Rapids, Iowa. So Cedar Rapids, Iowa was a pretty small town. It was one of those small towns where everybody knows everybody. And you've got a couple families that have just like been there forever, and like, you know, everybody or a lot of people from the family stay and they're involved in stuff. So you're going to hear the name Beets a lot in this story. The Beets brothers, so Billy and his brothers, there were a couple of them that were reverends. They ran a lot of the businesses in town, and they took it upon themselves to get very involved in the search for Naomi. You can read a lot of different ways into this, but like, it is normal for loved ones to be involved in searching, and family members. And it was said that Naomi got very close with the Beets family, and that's part of the reason why she ended up staying in Cedar Rapids. So again, people have read into it both ways. I'll let you make your choices on how you read into this. So like I said, the Beets brothers get very involved in the search. And 2 days after Naomi went missing, one of them, it didn't say which in the article, but one of the Beets brothers found her car. It was found in a Kmart parking lot, abandoned, and there was no sign of Naomi there. But it obviously, like, he found it, he looked inside of it kind of thing, so it was compromised by today's standards of like a crime scene potentially. And this Kmart was actually 0.2 of a mile away from a church that was pastored by Reverend Wendell Beets, who was another one of the Beets brothers. We don't know for sure if it was him that found the car because the article didn't say which of the brothers found it, but it could have been. So the car is found on Tuesday. The next day, which is Wednesday, Reverend Paul Beets, different Beets brother, borrowed some walkie-talkies from the Civil Defense Department in Lynn County, which is where Cedar Rapids, Iowa is. So he borrows some walkie-talkies and coordinates about 30 citizens to search for Naomi. It was said that they started from the Kmart parking lot and went out from there, but they didn't find anything. Around the same time, the police came out and said there was no reason to suspect foul play here, which Naomi's family kind of disagrees with because she had just bought a house, bought a car. She even was stopping at the gas station. Like, why would she be going to fill up her tank if she was going to leave the car and run? Right? Like, it feels weird. But that was it, you know? They didn't really have much else to go on. They hadn't found any evidence. And as an adult, like, she could just leave if she wanted to, right? So at this point, it kind of fell out of the papers and it didn't loop back until several months later. So by September of that year, Billy Beets had moved into Naomi's home. He had moved in, he was living there full time, he was giving it out as his address, and we can actually like trace this back because in September, one of his nephews was arrested for like on drag racing charges. Actually, a couple of his nephews were, but one of them gave his name as Billy Beets instead of his actual name. He was trying to get away with it. Obviously, it's a small town and the police know he's not Billy Beets. Like, people know who Billy Beets is. But when he gave his name as Billy Beets, he gave his home address as Naomi's address. So, like, clearly people knew Billy was living in this home that Naomi had purchased. However, Billy wasn't paying the mortgage on the home. He was just living there for free. And so in January of 1982, the next year, because she went missing in 1981, so January 1982, the bank foreclosed on the home and Billy was forced to move out. So the more I looked into this, the more I saw that name Beets popping up in different news articles through the years. And it turns out this wasn't an isolated incident for the Beets brothers to be involved in a crime, an indictment, someone going missing, someone mysteriously dying. Yeah. So I'm going to run you through a list of everything that I found on the Beets brothers in Cedar Rapids over the years. Buckle up. The first report that we're going to talk about, not the first one I found, but we're going to start in 1968. So this is like 14 years before this happened, 13 years. Yeah, so 1968, the Gazette reported that there was a federal warrant for unlawful flight to avoid prosecution that was filed against Wendell Beets, who would go on to become Reverend Wendell Beets. He had 15 counts of false like checks written or like bad checks. This actually was not the first time he'd had an issue with this, because he had had a 30-day suspended sentence for the same thing in 1967. 1967. So 20 days later, on April 30th, he was located by the FBI in Arkansas. And instead of being tried in Arkansas, where he was found, he refused to waive extradition and was brought back to Cedar Rapids, Iowa. In Cedar Rapids, he stood in front of a judge there and was given a 7-year sentence. However, that sentence was waived to probation under the supervision of that judge, who was Reverend John Thomas. He was the district court judge in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and the conditions were that he was under probation to Reverend Thomas under the conditions that he makes restitution for all of his outstanding checks. So he never goes to jail for this other than the time that he is already served. So fast forwarding a little bit, it was Saturday, July 11th, early in the morning, so like 1 or 2 a.m. it sounded like, and Paula Jean Oberbrokling, I think I said that Paula Jean Oberbroekling disappeared after leaving her apartment, or her residence, sorry. So she leaves the house in the early hours of the morning. She was 18 years old at the time and vanished until her remains were found in November of that year. So several months later. They were pretty badly decomposed when they were found, but so it wasn't immediately obvious what had happened to her. But the Cedar Rapids police chief told the media and the paper that it was his opinion that Wendell Beets was, quote, wholly aware of what happened to Paula Paula, and Wendell Beets' sister's role in Paula's murder. So clearly there was something there that the police knew and they just didn't have enough evidence to prove, I guess. But there's that. Paula's murder has never been solved. That is also an unsolved case. So up next is 1978, when Naomi Wilson and Benny Wilson moved to Cedar Rapids, and then are divorced, and Naomi begins dating Billy Beets. So in 1979, so September of 1979, Billy Beets files for bankruptcy. In January of 1980, there were 5 charges filed against a teenager, 19-year-old named Charles Tate. He allegedly argued with and hit Therese Beets, and then drove to her residence and threatened to injure Reverend Paul Beets with a 18-1/4-inch machete. In July of 1980 is when Naomi Wilson purchases her home in Cedar Rapids and begins to buy things to fix it up. She's working on the house. So in December of 1980, Reverend Paul Beets, one of the Beets brothers, calls the police to report that someone has broken into his home. He reports over $4,000 of items missing in his insurance claim, but one of the key items that was missing in this was his police scanner radio. So that has gone missing and was never recovered. Next are the articles about Naomi's disappearance and her car being found. On April 25th, Billy Beets was interviewed by the Gazette, which is their local newspaper, and actually criticizes police for not having taken fingerprints off of the car and all of that, but doesn't say why he didn't address that before he contaminated the crime scene, got in her car, and drove it home on April 14th when it was found. So that's interesting. But regardless, he criticizes the police. He also makes a bold statement to say that he suspects foul play in her disappearance and thinks that she is no longer alive. Naomi's brother, John Pollard, also speaks to the newspaper and is interviewed in this issue, and he said that he has a much more positive outlook about the case at this point. He and his family were still holding out hope that Naomi was alive somewhere and had just chosen to leave. His parents had already lost 2 sons earlier in their lives, and his parents were just very upset about the whole thing, so they were staying positive and hoping that they would still find Naomi alive. I think as a family, you kind of have to do that in this situation, right? Like, until you, like, especially at that point, it had only been a week and a half. Like, it was very possible they were still going to find her. On September 13th of 1981, Richard Beets, who was a teenager at the time, was charged with drag racing. This was when another one of his cousins who was with him gave Billy Beets' name and address to the police. But what's interesting about this, so he drag races, reckless driving, he crashes into a car and causes it to roll over with a passenger in it. Fortunately, the passenger survived, but he then crossed the median and crashed into an apartment, which coincidentally, was formerly occupied by Naomi Wilson's ex-husband, Benny Wilson. He had lived there in 1976, which is when he was still married to Naomi, which means that Naomi also lived there in 1976. It's just a coincidence. Up next is in September of 1982, so just over a year after Naomi had gone missing, Billy Beets, his son is born. Yep. So he and his now wife, Sandra Waddell Beets, they had a baby. His name was Marcus Beets, which means, if you backtrack, that she got pregnant shortly after Billy was evicted from living in Naomi's home, or in that same month. So that was 1982. The next thing that was like major enough to mention here was in 1992, but it was happening the whole time. So in 1992, allegations surfaced against Reverend Wendell Beets, accusing him of sexual misconduct and sexually abusing teen parishioners for years. So as it tends to happen, the first allegation comes out, and that brings forth several more allegations, up until during a sermon in front of 50 of his total 150 parishioners, Reverend Beets admits to having done the sexual misconduct. He resigns from the church, but before leaving town with his family, from where he was, it didn't say where he was, but it was in the Cedar Rapids Gazette. So before leaving town, he tells Louise Ellis, who is the mother of one of the accusers, she was also a minister in the church, that, quote, "Nobody's going to stop me from preaching." So obviously a warrant is issued for his arrest. He was 47 at the time, and at 1:30 in the morning on September 23rd, 1992, he was arrested for charges of criminal sexual misconduct. By the time they had printed the article on Thursday about it, so the next day, his $26,000 bond had been posted and he was out of prison. On December 15th, 1993, so a whole year later, there was a one-day-long trial in which he was convicted of criminal sexual misconduct against one of his female teenage parishioners. However, less than 2 years later, Reverend Wendell Beets was back in business as a reverend, alongside his brother Paul Beets, at a different church. On November 28th of 1995, Tony Beets, who, connecting the dots, was Billy Beets' 31-year-old son, which if you date that back, means that he was born prior to Naomi's disappearance, but he was not Naomi's son. So Billy's son with another woman before he dated Naomi. He was arrested and charged with felony assault with intent to commit sexual abuse with bodily injury. He was accused of entering the residence of a female acquaintance, carrying a knife, striking her, and announcing that he is, quote, going to force her to have sex. The woman escaped, but Tony was charged. On June 21st of 1997, 22-year-old Tracy Ann Everson was beaten and suffocated to death in her Cedar Rapids apartment. Reverend Wendell Beets, who was now the senior pastor at a different church, officiated the funeral services. And Tracy's murder remains unsolved to this day. Monday, November 3rd, 1997, Richard DeForest Beets, who is the son of Reverend Paul Beets, he was 33 at the time, he allegedly commits suicide by drowning. The article said allegedly. Didn't say anything else. I couldn't find much else on it, but he commits suicide allegedly by drowning. And his uncle, Reverend Wendell Beets, conducts the memorial services. And then, on Wednesday, November 5th, 2003, so this is now 5 years later, mental math, but 5 years later, Marcus Beets, remember him? He was mentioned back in earlier. He came up before, but he was 21 years old, and he at the time was a premier drummer. Kind of a big deal. He dies from an alleged self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. During the memorial celebration of his life, his uncle, Wendell Beets, famously said, or quote said, "This is a tragedy, but it has divine purpose." And also says, "This didn't happen for no reason," and urged those present not to give up on God, but to cleanse yourself of your sins. His other uncle, who is now a bishop, Paul Beets, helped conduct the services as well. And that seems like a long list, but that's not all. We're just going to stop there in 2003 because it kind of closes the loop with Marcus Beets. It goes on, and over the years, the Beets brothers, so Billy, Paul, and Wendell, they continue to make the news and suffer financial and personal difficulties. They swap churches they reverend at or bishop at now. Like they swap the churches that they're working with. They, year after year, have property tax delinquency issues, so they're just not paying some of their taxes. And one by one, they officiate funeral services for close friends and young family members, many of whom mysteriously died by alleged suicide or short illness. So I put my project down because I got to the neckline bind off section and I don't want to mess it up while I'm talking, but I want to finish telling you the story. So we're going to fast forward again, and in May of 2010, the Doe Network actually found a potential Jane Doe that could match Naomi. They found it through like news and photos. She wasn't in the database at the time, but they found it, and this was the photo of the doe. It also matched Naomi's age, height, weight, and characteristics. The body of this woman, this Jane Doe, was found in Houston, Texas in August of 1981. So just a few months, or I guess like 3.5 months after she went missing. So they went to make the match, and that was when the Cedar Rapids Police realized that they didn't have dental records, DNA, or fingerprints for Naomi Wilson. In spite of the fact that it had been raised to the media by Billy Beets that like they didn't take fingerprints off the car, like what were they going to compare them to? They didn't have her fingerprints. So realizing all this, obviously at that point in 2010, it's too late to go get these things. And Naomi never had any children, which is the best match when you don't have the parents' DNA. Now, I do want to address just real quick, like the fingerprints, obviously that's a miss by the police, but the DNA, like technology's come a long way since 1978, especially crime scene tech. So it's very possible that they just like didn't know to collect hair or DNA samples at the time because they didn't know it would be useful later. But assume positive intent, right? But so for whatever reason, they don't have any of this. And she didn't have any children to give DNA samples. So instead, her brothers both submit DNA samples, and using the two, they're able to put together a profile that like likely would have matched or been a partial match to her. Using this, they never came out and publicly said that this Jane Doe was not a match to Naomi. But at this point, at the time that I'm recording this, no match has been found to Naomi, and her case is still unsolved, and she is still missing. At this point, the Cedar Rapids Police Department are calling her disappearance and suspected murder. If you have any information about it, please contact the Cedar Rapids Police Department. I'll put the phone number right here. And if you have any information about the unidentified woman found in Houston, they'd like you to contact the Texas Department of Safety or Public Safety in Austin, Texas. The phone number is here. It's important to note, and I think at this point, like we've kind of seen that by the fact that the police are calling it her unsolved disappearance and suspected murder, that foul play is suspected in this case. Unfortunately, without a body, it's hard to prove, right? The other thing that I want to add that's a very new development, or newish, happened earlier this year, was that Wendell Beets died this year. He passed away on February 24th of 2021, and he was 75 at the time of his passing. So, what do you guys think? I obviously we know that like there were some issues with the Beets brothers. Like regardless of what happened with Naomi, like these were not good people. They were like convicted of sexual misconduct against teenagers kind of people. And like clearly there was a lot that family got up to. So a lot of people think that the Beets family was involved in her disappearance. I also just find the whole like get divorced and start dating the uncle thing kind of odd. I don't know about you guys, like to me that's weird, but I also like I don't live in that time. I don't live in her world. I don't know what was going on. That's just my reaction to reading it, right? But I would love to hear what you think. So go ahead and drop a comment and let me know. Let's talk about it. Also, I will put the information for contacting the various police departments if you do know anything about Naomi's case. Any of the missing women with unsolved murders that I have, or the missing women or women with unsolved murders that I've talked about in this episode, or the Jane Doe from Texas. So all of the information will be in the description if you have need of it. If you do have information, please, 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 please come forward with it. We need people like this, or like you, who have information to help us solve these unsolved crimes and bring some peace to the families. All right. Well, that's all for today, y'all. I will be back next week. I hope you all have a great week, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.